you, Allison.
Ready when you are.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. So everybody, please join me in welcoming Allison Parc. This is, I believe, our 14th episode. I can't believe that, of our interviews. Allison, we started these when the COVID lockdown started, okay? Because as you know, with respect to the timing, Whiskey Week in Chicago was canceled. Okay, and you know, the big world of whiskeys and everything that goes on in Chicago. And I had planned something for every night that week because I'm an empty nester, and this was the first year that I was going to be participating in everything. You know, yeah, it was killing me, just killed me. So after that was canceled, I said, I've got to do something. I have a bunch of people who like whiskey, so let's just start doing something online. And my friend Eric, he and I have been at countless whiskey tastings over the years, and he actually knows how to use a computer, unlike me. So, you know, he's a good partner with respect to all this stuff. So I'm going to start off asking you the same question that I ask everybody, which is, what are you drinking tonight and why?
Very good question. Tonight, as I mentioned right before we hit record, tomorrow, October 1st, is Brenne's anniversary of when we were on the market. So it's our 8th anniversary.
Congratulations.
Honor, thanks. Yeah, honestly, it's a feat.
Yeah, it's a big deal.
I started by bicycling this stuff around New York City. I'm proud to say we're still here.
Wow.
But in honor of our 8th birthday, this is Brenne 10, but it's the 08 vintage that has yet to be released. And maybe to this group, you might get the 24-hour heads up that it'll be available tomorrow online.
Now, will it be in retail in Chicago and other cities, or is this an only online thing?
Well, it will probably, maybe eventually be in retail stores, but we are launching it. We have a new e-com site that's going live tomorrow. So
okay.
Buybrenne.com, BUYBRENNE.com. It's live now, just no one knows about it, but it totally works if you were so inclined. I don't know if the Brenne 10 is showing up as having stock, because we are literally air freighting 3 cases to the warehouse for our announcement tomorrow.
Now, is there an issue with respect to certain states and shipping to certain states? Like you probably can't ship to Pennsylvania, for instance.
I mean, there's a lot of, you know, just like you, I've also been sitting around during COVID and maybe worked on some loopholes.
Understood.
By Brenne will ship to every state except Ohio, Louisiana, and Mississippi.
Okay. Okay, good to know. So let me tell you what I'm drinking tonight. So I stopped by Binny's, and this is Brenne 10, and you and I looked at the vintage ahead of time. So the vintage on this is the 2017 version. So I'm drinking my first dram of it right now, and I'm smelling the cognac, because this is aged in French Limousine oak and with cognac barrels, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. So tell me about what I'm drinking right now.
Well, cheers, everyone, first of all.
Thank you. Cheers, everyone.
Thank you all for gathering virtually. Thank you. I love these whiskeys. So Brenne 10, this is our little Brenne 10 lineup. There's another one in the collection. To me, they are my annual vintage releases. So there's only ever around 300 cases, some years 290, some years 310, but only ever 300 cases of each vintage. And the packaging that you all have access to is our original packaging. You can find the vintage in silver, and it'll say the bottling year. So you just have to do very easy arithmetic to subtract 10 to understand what distillation vintage that is. Right. So you're drinking the 07, bottled in 2017. And then we held back all of our stock on the 08 vintage, which will be the first vintage in the new packaging.
Okay.
So that'll come out, like I said, tomorrow on buybrenne.com. Okay. And then eventually, if we don't sell out there, then we will push it out to retail. But so with that said, what you're drinking, whenever you get any of the Brenne 10s, you are drinking a 10-year-old single malt that's made seed to spirit in Cognac, France at our distillery. That said, the difference between each vintage is that I take 4 barrels every year that we've done this release, and marry them together to create that year's batch.
Okay.
Those 4 barrels, I'll never fully disclose what they are in each vintage. We're the first single malt in the world aged exclusively in new French oak and Cognac barrels. So it's a really special, beautiful, you know, piece of information that we get to hold close to our chest.
Right.
And so it'll always be some combination, right? One of the 4 has often been a new French oak, right? So the whiskey will sit in a new French Limousin oak for 10 years. Another barrel may or may not be a wet XO Cognac barrel, and I can explain that later. One may be a dried Cognac barrel, and one could be like 5 years in new French oak, taken that, you know, that whiskey came out, and then it did another 5 years in a particular Cognac barrel. Right. So,
and it's all single malt, right? It's all 100% malted barley, correct?
Yeah.
And you mentioned the number of barrels that you get every year. So may I assume that this is a function of how much barley you actually produce every year?
So we distill every piece of barley that we're able to harvest. We grow 2 heirloom varietals of barley. Everything that we do is certified organic. So when you look at heirloom crop and you look at organic, you know, your yields can vary greatly depending on what the weather was in that year. So that said, we bottle everything, or we turn into whiskey every piece of grain that we get that we can use. And we do put a majority of our whiskey aside for estate cask. Okay.
Got it. So then you mentioned a term that I also saw on your website and in your bio, the term seed to spirit. Okay, so I love that. By the way, I love that marketing. I love that idea of coming up with that simple little line, seed to spirit. So what does that mean to you? And does it mean to you that you have control over every aspect of the process, you know, everything that goes into it? How did you come up with that model?
Yeah, it's really the impetus as to why I started making whiskey in the first place. I know that Brenne is a French whiskey. You may notice I don't have a French accent. I am 100% American, and my whiskey is 100% French.
I was going to ask you how that happened.
Yeah, it was interesting. But like you all, I love whiskey, and I was an early collector in the early 2000s, and I mean early because I was 23 years old. So kind of an interesting thing to start collecting international single malts at 23 years old.
Yeah, that's pretty unique. Yeah.
Yeah, I was a late bloomer. I didn't start really drinking until I was about 22, and I just skipped the whole cocktail beer thing, and I went straight to single malts. I mean, when Yamazaki 18 is the second dram you ever have, how could you turn away?
Yeah, that's a high bar. Yeah, I was brought up drinking with friends in high school and college, a big jug of J&B, so it's a little bit different.
A little different. I was a ballerina, so my history is that of starvation, right?
Yeah, ballerinas, they don't eat or drink, you know. So how did you go from being a ballerina to deciding that you wanted to be a whiskey entrepreneur?
Yeah, so Yamazaki 18, right, the whiskey that changed my life, and I was really curious to understand, and by the way, just as whiskey collectors here, the first whiskey I had was at my cousin's wedding. I just walked up to the bartender and I was like, cool, I'd love like a whiskey and soda, or like scotch and soda, that sounds cool. And it was Dewar's. It was Dewar's and something, I don't remember what he mixed it with. I think it was like a ginger ale or something. I liked it enough. I kept drinking it throughout the night. And I liked it enough that when I got back to New York City, I was like, let me find a whiskey bar. And then the first dram I got at this whiskey bar was a Yamazaki 18, right? So it hooked me enough. And I kept sitting there.
Are you telling me that somebody started you on Yamazaki 18?
I started myself on Yamazaki.
Wow.
This is like 2003, 2004. Like, it was collecting dust on the bottom of the shelf, and it was $25 for a glass. And I was making like $12,000 in salary that year as a dancer / I was cleaning apartments / I was a party motivator at bar mitzvahs. Like, I mean, I was like, am I going to pull the trigger on a $25 drink?
Yeah, but it changed your life.
I'm so glad I did.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
I joke that I went there with a man and I kept the whiskey and let him go. Sorry. Sorry.
Okay, now that's a great line. That is a wonderful line. So then you had that drink. How did you decide to become a whiskey entrepreneur, and how did that happen?
So I started asking, and I got a Twitter account and started blogging. I just literally went to a liquor store and started buying bottles and was asking the liquor store, do they have single malts made outside of Scotland? And at that point, I was digesting every book Dave Broom and the late Michael Jackson had ever written. And I got a, like, set myself up with a little blog and thought, oh, I'll just like talk about my experience, and got a Twitter account. And the question I realized I kept asking both myself and of this industry was, if people are going to start making single malts outside of Scotland, right?
Mm-hmm.
The Swedes broke ground with Macmillan in 1999. Around the early 2000s, there was all that news about Indian whiskey,
Mm-hmm.
typically historically been rum-based distillate, like like a sugarcane-based distillate. They were switching it over to be grain-based. And the Japanese whiskeys were really taking off in France in 2004,
Mm-hmm.
before they ever hit the wave over here. So I was like, there's something happening.
Yeah.
So just kind of like, as I was an early, or late bloomer to drinking, what I was learning from the wine industry and from all this like download that I was getting from these whiskey books was this kind of sense of place, right? And they were talking about it in whiskey, usually in the framework of Scotland, Highlands, Lowlands, Campbell,
Mm-hmm.
all that kind of stuff, Speyside. And then in wine, I just loved the idea that you could be a sommelier in Chicago or in Tokyo and open up a bottle of wine and
Right.
by scent and taste tell you what mountain region France is from.
Right.
So my question kept saying, is anyone making a single malt outside of Scotland that's using 100% local and indigenous ingredients? So is anyone trying to show terroir in single malt whiskeys? And Jim was trying to do it, or was doing it with Bruichladdich, but that was still an expression of a micro terroir in Scotland, right? It wasn't happening in international whiskeys.
Right. And where else was it? Right. Right. And of course, now many people are doing it. Now there are a lot of people here in the States who are growing their own grains on their own farms or on their family farms, and they're making things. We've interviewed a bunch of them. It's wonderful. So then, but the thing is, you went from somebody who was making $12,000 a year, who was, challenged to, purchase a $25 shot of something. How did you go from that to becoming an entrepreneur?
Yeah. One, I always knew I was going to be my own boss. I'm just not great at being employed by other people.
Mm-hmm.
I always thought that was a hindrance until I realized entrepreneur was a thing. And I was like, that's cool.
Yes.
Well, originally, again, I was looking at it through a collector's lens, and not collector by any means of these collections that we're seeing behind some of you. It was really as a collector's palette, right? I have
Mm-hmm.
probably 200 bottles in here, but they're all things that are open that I'm like sipping over the years. So I was thinking, oh, well, if these, and I knew enough, I just from talking to people on Twitter and walking in and out of liquor stores in New York, I knew enough to go, like Astor Wines kept pointing me to K&L and Binny's, right?
Okay.
So at that time, it was Parc Ave Liquors, Astor Place, Binny's, and K&L, and High Time were really like where the collectors looked for whiskey in this country.
Mm-hmm.
And so everyone was kind of pointing to each other. And I thought, okay, well, if I'm going to all these liquor stores or just calling them, and no one has international single malts that are focused on terroir, surely that just means that no one's importing them.
Right. It's an opportunity. Right.
So that was my first idea. I'll start an import company. Then I had, again, very little money, but I racked up some frequent flyer points. So I got myself on a plane. I went to France on frequent flyer points and Japan on frequent flyer points. That was a very long flight.
Wow.
And I went and I visited with these distilleries. I even went to India. I went to a couple other parts in Europe, and everyone at that time sat me down and was like, presented me with two whiskeys, and if they were doing an unpeated whiskey, right, they would present me with their unpeated whiskey and an unpeated scotch. And they would say, blind taste test, can you tell the difference? And I was like, I'm really sorry, I can't. And they were like, we know, we've done it, bravo. And I was like, I'm sorry, what? You just missed the mark. Copying is not the idea, right? You want to create, you have the opportunity to innovate with your provenance. Why would you the Scotch are doing great. They're doing Scotch. Let them do Scotch. You could do something else. So that's how I kind of got on the international scene very quickly. Again, there weren't that many people, and there especially weren't that many 23-year-old women poking around the international whiskey space.
Right.
So a lot of guys were like, "Oh my God, you're so fun! Wait, come drink with us, and we'll tell you everything we know." Like big room at the balcony. I mean, I hung out with the Foresight still makers, and like we drank Cobble until 4 a.m. before it was ever even a thing that people knew about. It wasn't even in a bottle, right? It's like
Wow.
just a really cool
I
time.
mean, it must have been a blast. It must have been just so much fun.
The best. Yeah.
Wow, that's a great story. So then now, I love the story that you told, and I've read about it also, where you actually were delivering the bottles to the bars on your bicycle.
Yeah.
Okay, and so you're walking in with a bottle of French whiskey, and everybody always talks about, of course, Scotch, Irish, and all that stuff. When did you know that you were actually, developing a product that was going to take off? When was it that you really knew?
I didn't know it was going to take off, but I knew I was developing a product when someone had connected me with this distiller, my now distiller in France. And by the way, I met the 5 guys who were making whiskey in France before I showed up. And I gave them all this idea, and they all patted me on the shoulder and said, "Go back to New York, little girl. You don't know what you're talking about. This stupid idea. Why would you ever do that? We are making..."
That was very good. You spent a lot of time in France. That was very, very good.
So finally, someone introduced me to the guy who now makes the whiskey with me. And he was young. I mean, I was 24 when I finally met him, and he was 28 at the time, 3rd generation Cognac maker. And he had a version of what eventually became Brenne. At the time, it was only 4 years old. The oldest stock was 4 years old. And then he had 3-year-old, 2-year-old, 1-year-old, whatever. And I tasted the whole lineup, and I just thought it was really cool. And I was like, "Oh, that's interesting. Like, can I see your packaging?" He's like, I don't have it. I don't have Ballerina marketing it. I was like, "Oh, cool." By the way, I went to college for jazz hands. Like, I literally have a college degree in jazz dance.
Wow. I didn't even know you could do that.
Yeah, apparently. I have a paper that proves it. So I was like, "Oh, cool. Right. Yeah. Like, you hate marketing. Okay. Do you want to be partners on this? Like, I'd like to start an import company." And he was like, "No, Allison, no, I don't want to do that." Cool. Like, what do you want? So it eventually worked out that that all he wanted to do was be the farmer and ferment and distill, and he wanted nothing to do with maturation forward.
Okay. So see that actually, okay. So I was going to ask you that question. So the whole concept of how you decide how you're going to age the whiskeys, the barrels you're going to use and all that stuff. It sounds like you're telling me these are your decisions, that you yourself, you're the one making it. Okay. Are you ever going to, consider things like peated whiskeys, things like that? It's like, because obviously, you have your thing and it's really good. And by the way, I'm really enjoying this. This is delicious. What other things are coming down the road for Brenne?
Well, and I'm sorry, I'm a little long-winded. I'll tie up the last question by answering. I knew I was starting a whiskey company. I had, when I was doing all this travel, I was a professional ballerina starting at age 9. So I socked away as much money as I could. I didn't grow up with a family with like a bank account. So I had about $86,000 in savings, even when I was making my $12,000 in New York.
Oh, impressive.
Yeah, thanks. I was very proud of that number.
Yeah, that's great.
And I knew I was starting a whiskey company when I wired 84,000 of that money to my now distiller.
Wow.
The only way I could get him to work.
Okay, I've got to tell you something. So when you told anyone that you were about to do that you were about to wire, so you didn't tell anybody?
No.
Okay, because I can just imagine people saying, "Are you out of your mind?" To take that much money and wire it overseas for this project that is obviously a risky venture. That's impressive. That's impressive.
Thanks.
Yeah, no, that's great. No, it happened. No, that's great.
To tell the tale.
No, it's a wonderful tale, and we could spend another hour talking about it. But back to my question: will you ever be doing anything peated? And if not, why not?
Yeah, only because the core value of the Brenne brand I'm happy I could start another distillery in France even and do some peated whiskey. I think that would be remarkable. But what Brenne is the expression of the terroir of the Cognac region. So 100%. If peat occurred naturally, hell yes, I would do the funkiest freaking whiskeys.
No, that's great. Well, right, because I know obviously that's a big deal for people. Like for Amrut, they had to import their peat, and in so Westland in Seattle, I think that they get their peat close by. I think from Oregon, so it's not that far away, from Seattle. But obviously, if there's no peat in the region where you're making your whiskey and you have this whole seed to spirit thing, you can't do that. So one last question before I open it up, because I know a lot of people here have questions. We have quite a few whiskey geeks on here. So obviously the world of whiskey is a personal world. It's a world where we talk to each other and we see each other in person. We stand across the table from each other. That's where you and I met at World of Whiskey several years ago. I didn't have this. Actually, no, we didn't meet at World of Whiskey. It was Whiskey Jubilee. It was with Jason and John. It was Whiskey Jubilee. How has your business been affected by obviously you have an overseas company. You're here. Travel is screwed right now. So how has this affected you and your company?
Yeah, in ways I don't think I can get my head around yet, because I think it's a little too scary. And also, we're going to be okay.
Of course we are. But the thing is that, in a normal year, how many times would you go to France?
6.
Okay. And how many times have you been there the last 6 months?
0.
Okay, so as somebody who is, entrepreneurs are typically control freaks to a certain extent.
What?
You're not there. You're not there. So how has that affected the operation of Brenne and your comfort level?
This is the best thing about whiskey. It just needs to hang out in the barrels.
Okay.
Like
Great.
for me, I mean, it's super easy. If I had a whiskey that was aged for a matter of months or even just a couple of years, I might be a little more panicked.
Oh, but you have a 10-year thing you're going, so.
And a estate cask even, it sits in for 6 to 8 years. Like I'm 38 now, so I've been at this for at least 14. It doesn't mean I'm a master by any stretch. I just know my barrels, right? I know
Right.
really well.
Right. No, I get it. So, Eric, I'm going to ask you, do you have any specific questions for Allison before we open it up to everybody else?
So when you said you usually do 4 barrels each year to blend it for that year's release, I mean, what are you looking for each of those barrels? Like what kind of, components are you looking for to really pull in together for the whiskey?
Great question. So when we're talking about the 4 barrels, we're talking about any of the Brenne 10 expressions, right? So estate cask is a completely different beast. And I see Michael Bloom has a bottle that looks like this. Can you turn that around? Do you have a batch or a barrel number on the back? Barrel? Oh, that's amazing. Dude, Michael, you've got one of the very first bottles ever. So
Bloom, are you there?
Yeah. So
okay.
I didn't unmute myself. So I have barrel number 297.
So exciting.
And not much left.
Little math to that's technically our 47th barrel.
Of course it is. That's my favorite number and that's so funny. So that's crazy.
Yeah.
47th barrel?
Yeah, that's our 47th barrel.
By the way, Michael's now going to write that down. He's very much a geek with respect to the details of what he drinks, and you just made him so happy right now. I just can't even imagine how happy he is right now. But back to Eric's question. Eric, I don't think your question's been completely answered yet, though, about the barrels.
Yeah. So what do you look for when you're doing your barrel, picking your 4 barrels?
For Brenne 10, I want each vintage to taste a little different than the year prior. So looking for, apologies, there goes our building's fire alarm. Hold please. Just gonna go on mute.
What was that?
It's a fire alarm going off.
In a high rise.
Okay, in whose building? Was that in Allison's building?
Allison's.
Allison, are you okay?
Totally fine.
Okay.
My boyfriend just made dinner. No, I'm kidding. No,
I don't know if we're ever going to get Eric's question answered here.
I know, I'm so sorry. Balance, of course, and especially, well, it's Brenne 10 is something that I look for balance in the combination of the four of them, but I definitely want complexity. Texture is really important, and then in tasting notes, I look more for chocolate. Think more trail mix in terms of the fruit notes versus the bright tropical notes that you'll find in a state cask. And I also look for, this might seem like a really strange thing, but if you've ever had like almonds in your hands and then you eat all the almonds and then there's like that almond dust.
Yeah.
Like a particular flavor, and I have a particular relationship to it. It's to me, it's the closest taste association to what the barrel room smells like in cognac. So if I find that note, then I really want to pull that out and make sure that's kind of my primary barrel.
Got it. Great. That's wonderful.
That's cool.
That's like poetic almost. So
Yeah.
I'm going to open it up for questions right now. But before we get to everybody else, we do have another whiskey professional here. Yes, we have Brian. Okay, Brian Voigt from Impex. Brian, if you could unmute yourself for a second, do you have anything in particular, that you'd like to say or ask here as someone who is a professional in the industry like you are?
Can you hear me, by the way?
Yes, we can.
Yeah.
Yes,
Okay,
we can.
good. Allison, a couple of interesting questions. I'm the tech geek kind of guy, okay? So one of the things that I would, obviously just so you know, I don't know if you know Impex beverages, okay? But we do Kilchoman, we do Penderyn, we do Glenallachie. So we're buried in Scotch and whiskeys from all around the world. And one of the things that I've picked up is that the typical distiller will say that, the process is as important as the barrels. So one of the questions that I have for you is, in your process, are you using those like a typical still, first of all, like what we use in Scotland, or are you using one of those lambic type things that they use in Cognac, France, which gives a different type of still look? And obviously at that point, how do you decide the cuts? And does that, being that you're not the distiller yourself, do you tell the guy, and how do you know that he's doing what you want him to do, okay, to maintain that quality, etc.? And then, oddly enough, have you played around with extending the fermentation, the distillation, the all of those kind of things to see what happens in the process? And maybe I'm getting too geeky for these guys. I don't know.
No, you're not.
Not
Believe
enough.
me, you're not.
Geek more, geek more.
My
Okay.
only concern here is that you're asking a multi-part question, and
Yeah.
the way Allison answers a lot of these questions, each question has multi-part answers. So this could be a long time. So let's see what Allison does with that question.
Thank you. I'll try and be as fast as I possibly can. I will answer backwards. So yes, I'm always playing with everything. Yes, I have had barrels of whiskey that haven't been where I want them to be for the finished product. So there are plenty of French pastry chefs in and around Paris who have been lucky enough to perhaps get Brenne wholesale for their bonbons and things like that. But it's a very cool culture to be an experiment in, because there's a few more, there's just some different options to me than what I might have here. That's experimentation process. So as I said in the beginning, it's really crucial to what I identify as the core of Brenne's brand, to be expressive of everything that is relational to Cognac France, right? So that doesn't just mean the barley, that means the yeast. I'm sorry, let me also say that I'm doing this with my third generation Cognac producer, and they are still making Cognac. So this is a fully operational Cognac house. They don't have their own label. And they're very well immersed in that world. So once a year, they pause that, and we do the whiskey distillation together for about a month. And in that, so the barley grows out the back door of the distillery truly in the soil right there in between the vineyards. We also, for the fermentation, use the family's strain of yeast that they've been using since 1920 for their grape fermentation, which is really cool because if you taste basically like the beer of Brenne, it's extremely floral. Like almost like if you drink Highland Park and you know how it's like a floral, like a heather peat, right? And it has like those like lavender notes to the peat. Take those top floral notes and apply it to like a fruity beer. Like then you've got Brenne's base, right? And then we are not distilled in a pot still. We are distilled in an alembic Charente still. So this same still that this family uses for their cognac production, they only have one. It's gorgeous. If anyone has, I've got a big Le Creuset pot around here. If anyone knows Le Creuset, right? It's that cast iron that's enamel wrapped. Our still is like coated in this burnt red enamel, and it's very cool. So if you
Must
ever
be beautiful.
look up,
Must be gorgeous.
oh, my friends joke that I have a nail polish that I call Alembic Red, and I wear it when I go because I'm still girly. I can sling hooch, but I can still wear stilettos. So our still is really cool, and the brief description on distillation in that still. If you look at a pot still, it has like a giant onion shape, right? And if you look at an alembic still, it has basically a little onion on top. I could go into the specifics. I'm trying to pull back for myself. That little tiny globe on top is designed for eau de vie, for fruit-based distillation, such as cognac. When you are distilling fruit, you want in your distillate to taste fruit. So that little globe will assist more of the ester molecules through in the distillation process. And the ester molecules are literally the things that are fabricated in labs to make Laffy Taffy and Jolly Ranchers and all those candies that we know taste like those fruits. So they occur naturally in a distillation process and are really exemplified in an alembic Charente still. So by doing that with Brenne, we are getting a lot more fruit esters. When you asked me the question about cuts, it's super cool. We do 2 runs on the distillation in an alembic Charente still. We run the full the full product of the first run. We run it through the second time, and then we only keep the hearts on the second. And what's pretty cool, I mean, yes, we're like testing the ABV and things like that, but you can also do it by nose because the esters are so pronounced in this distillate that you can tell when it goes from like green pear to green apple to green banana and things like that. So
okay, I'll tell you a real quick story that's really true. I worked down for 3 days with the guy that owns Lark Distillery, Bill Lark, down in Tasmania.
of course.
And he blew me away. I was sitting at the still watching him work, and he did the cut into a wine glass, nosed it, and then said, okay, now he puts the hydrometer in and goes, yep, it's ready. Okay, there's your cut. So I understand that, yeah. But let me ask you this, because you don't have the distilling side, you're doing the aging side is the way I like to describe it, right? Because you're not actually running the still, correct?
No, me personally, I'm not pulling the levers. I could,
right.
but I'm not. Yeah.
Okay. How do you decide how long to let the fermentation go? How do you decide how long to let the actual run through the still go? How are those evaluations done for you?
I can't tell you everything. A couple of trade secrets in there. Yeah.
Okay.
But based on flavor, I mean, honestly, like the whole point of this thing is just to make some really delicious whiskey. But
Okay.
Right, and God knows, I've heard about you from Dave Sweet, needless to say. So you know.
Yeah, we interviewed Sweet. Several weeks ago. Great guy, and he's local here, in our area.
Yeah.
So he's a great guy. So I'm going to open it up for other questions right now. If other people have other questions,
I'm going to shut up.
No. Believe me, Brian, this has been great. No, you're. We'll talk later. We'll get you on the circuit here too. Absolutely. Actually, I think we have Sam Filmus.
He's my boss.
Okay, I think we actually have Sam in November, if I remember correctly. I don't have the list in front of me, so
okay.
Maybe he'd have you join him. So we'll see. Who knows? Anyway, I'm going to be quiet. Let's see. Any other people have questions right now? Let's see. Usually.
I was gonna say Paul, Michael,
Oh, I see
Michael.
Michael Nolan raising his hand. Nolan.
Allison, how you doing? You said you typically will pick 4 barrels for your 10, and you're distilling for about a month. On an average year, how much do you really distill? How many barrels are you putting down every year?
Yeah, it's a really good question. A lot. It's a weird thing. We've never told that number, so I just continuously not. But we're very blessed. Maybe because sales were slow in the beginning. I mean, who isn't, right? When you're first starting out, I laid down a lot of whiskey, and it wasn't always a month. Sometimes it would be a couple months, and it was really just kind of this him and I figuring this game out. We have millions of dollars worth of barrels in hanging out, aging. So, and I will say, like, we talked, I know, a lot about all the far more technical things, which are exciting to us whiskey nerds, right? And those things attribute to around collectively, right, as a whole, all of those aspects pulled together, around 30 to 40% of the end result. A majority of the result being from the barrels, which we didn't even get to talk about. But maybe we will. But I will just say, yeah, Paul's got, okay, I'll shut up and I'll let Paul ask his questions.
Well, I got a quick follow-up is,
Oh, sure.
Nolan always has follow-ups. It's okay. It's all good. It's always good.
so where are you selling your whiskey? Is it just the US or Europe, or what markets are you in?
Yeah, we're in
Globally.
over 10 countries now. So even during
Nice.
COVID, we opened up in Dubai and in Israel.
Oh,
Wow.
cool.
Congratulations. That's wonderful.
Thank you. I mean, I've trained the F&B director at Four Seasons in Mumbai over Zoom. I mean, I am on it. we are getting out there slowly but surely.
Oh, that's wonderful. So did Paul have a question?
No, he has 2 questions.
Shocking. Okay. Paul, take it away, buddy.
Wait, I'm limited to 2 this time? All right,
That was
so
wonderful.
I totally want to get into this whole barrel thing. And as the preface, right, you quoted one of my heroes before, a Mr. Jim McEwen, who likes to create some very, interesting whiskeys, is absolutely maniacally obsessed with terroir. But part of his other, part of his milieu is the crazy amount of different types of barrels that he plays around with and experiences with. It seemed like you were saying that you have a more limited range of barrels to kind of paint with, if you will. Why is that? Does that give you certain advantages? And can you just talk a little bit about the barrel aspect of your philosophy?
Oh my God. Yeah. I can give master classes.
A lot.
Yeah. I have given master classes on Limousin oak specifically. I get very excited about this topic, so thank you and maybe sorry.
I'm all in. I'm all in.
So I think it's really cool when you think about a majority of single malts made anywhere around the world, right? Probably over 80%, probably over 90% are aged in, actually over 90% are aged in ex-bourbon and or ex-sherry, right? And when you say about, on something over 4 years of age, 60 to 70% of the end flavor comes from the barrels in which it's aged. So that's a pretty significant limitation that our industry has self-imposed. I love how Jim plays. I love how when you go into Yamazaki's maturation room and they've got 6 different barrels and they're doing all these different amazing things with them. What is really cool and what I discovered and shocked me. We really are the first single malt in the entire world aged exclusively in new French Limousin oak and Cognac barrels. And it shocked me because, Balvenie did over 50 years now. I've got a bottle in here somewhere. They did a 10-year-old ex-bourbon and ex-Cognac expression. And he couldn't draw out the Cognac flavors that he wanted to if you talk to Dave about it a long time ago. And so what I realized when I started playing with these barrels is that I don't know that our industry and my predecessors have ever played with cognac barrels in their natural environment, right? So when you think about ex-bourbon barrels or even ex-sherry barrels, those distilleries in Kentucky and in Spain, right? Yeah, they take their liquid out, they take the rings off, they palletize the barrels, ship them over to Scotland. They can sit in the yard for 4 years outside. And then Glenmorangie calls up and they're like, we need 60, 3-year-old yard-aged barrels with new American oak heads. Cool, and the cooper rebuilds those, right? Tests them out, fills them with water, makes sure they're liquid tight, and then sends them over to the distillery. That's a very different journey than the barrels that I am now privy to use. So because I'm doing this at a cognac house, I can get these barrels what's called wet. So as soon as the cognac comes out, we can put the whiskey in. So what this does, and when you think about the fact that I'm working with a family that's been doing this formally since 1920, and they make VS, VSOP, and XO. And XO can range from historically 6 years, right? A cognac sits in a barrel for 6 years, and it can go. It can go for 40 years, 50 years, so on and so forth. So you take that range. So I experimented a lot with VS and VSOP. It wasn't the flavor profile that I wanted. It was too much French oak and less cognac than I wanted for the balance that I was looking for. Super inspired by Dave Stewart, who did, Balvenie Doublewood, I think, is one of the most approachable whiskeys in the entire world. And so I love that he was really the leader in that, bourbon and sherry barrel combination for a single malt. So I wanted to really kind of pay homage to him and do my own version of that in France using all those local ingredients. So that's thing one. I won't go out of Limousin oak, because if you look at France, let's pretend my hand is France. In the middle of your middle finger would be where Paris is. If you fold France in half and you go over to the West Coast, that's Cognac. So Cognac has this Mediterranean climate pushing up from Spain, this Celtic climate pushing down from one of our favorite places, we all know, Scotland, and it sits on the Atlantic Ocean. So with those three climate systems, you have this little microclimate, which is why Cognac got its designation to be a brandy producer, as Cognac just says champagne is champagne. Right next door to Cognac is the Limousin Forest. So these are the most expensive, the most expensive version of French oak comes from the Limousin Forest. These trees are cut down between 50 and 100 years old. So if you're just looking at your spectrum of possibility in new French oak, you have wood that can have been growing for 50 to 100 years and play with that spectrum, right? Wow. Then you stand in the XO Cognac game, right? Forget even VS and VSOP. Now you're looking at XO. Well, am I gonna work with a wet barrel, or do I wanna work with a dry barrel? Do I wanna work with an XO barrel that held Cognac for up to 6 years or 10 years, or do I wanna work with one that's 40 years? Right? So this shit is so fucking expensive, and exciting. It's a little expensive, but think about like a 40-year-old cognac barrel that has been dried out in the same cellar, hasn't left the walls, and then we reconstitute it for a minute to make sure it's watertight, and then put a whiskey in it for 10 years? Are you kidding me? It's so good. So I get a little passionate. I'm really excited. A lot. But my barrels, they're so amazing. And the spectrum is just, it's outrageous. It's my spice cabinet.
You know, I got to, when I opened this, I immediately smelled the cognac. Okay. You know, I smelled the cognac and it was delicious. It's like, wow, that is unique. It's special. And I'm drinking a little bit too much of this tonight. This is damn good stuff. I'm really enjoying it. So it's wonderful. So I know Paul probably, well, you have one more question, right, Paul? Or did she pretty much cover it there?
Or I can call him Michael Bloom and then get back.
Yeah, Bloom as let's go. Yeah. All right.
I have a short question. Sure. I have a short question. So it actually comes right after the last one. So have you ever thought of marketing or bringing the cognac from your distiller to market too? The reason that I'm asking that question is like Paul from Few just recently released his Immortal Rye, right? Yeah. And the first question I had was, what does that tea taste like so I can find it in your whiskey? So I went
Right,
out
the
and
oolong
found-
tea, right? That's oolong tea, right? Is that what
Yeah,
it is?
So
Yeah.
it's a oolong tea. And so have you?
Yeah, it's such a great question. So clearly I invested my personal money into this to kick it off. And the one, I had a very small window of an opportunity to bottle my distiller's cognac. He was between contracts and I could have jumped in there. I wanted to. My distributor, my national distributor in the US at the time, ran all the data and just basically said there's no home for this product. And I said, but all the whiskey people, like all the whiskey nerds are going to buy it. And they're like, yeah, they're going to buy one bottle because it's going to be really cool and they're going to nerd out on it. And then we're never going to be able to move volume. So we won't bring that in even if you make it. And I was like,
You should add a little sample bottle tied to the in with the package of Brenne.
I've thought about it, and then the opportunity to set up that contract has since ceased, sadly. It's really cool. I have one bottle here, and I when I train my team, I don't let anyone taste it, but I make them smell it.
Well, because you need to keep it, right? You can't get rid of it, you know?
Yeah, it's too special.
Yeah, no, I understand that. So we're pretty much close to the end here. Does anybody else have any other questions before I wrap it up? Anybody else raising
Brian.
hand? Questions? Let's see. All right, Brian, did you have something else you wanted to ask?
Yeah, you're on mute still.
Well, he's coming off mute. I just want to say,
Hi.
Hello, Brian. Okay. So, Allison, what were
Sorry.
you about to, hold on one second. Allison, what were you about to say?
I was just going to say the blue of our core expression is actually the color of the doors on our distillery.
Oh, nice. And how did he get the name Brenne?
Oh my God. Because 23-year-old me, 24-year-old when I met my distiller, I didn't know how to pronounce the word in French for the part of the barley that you turn into whiskey.
Mhm.
And when I Google worded it, it's B-R-I-N. And I was like, oh my God, this is great. Let me just like this. I couldn't tell if my distiller wanted to work with me or not. So I thought I need to pay him a compliment and kind of like giggle and like compliment something the next time he says anything, right? And I know he was super proud of his barley. And so I like kind of like gave a little giggle and like tapped his arm. I was like, don't Brenne Treybell. Like, yeah, dude, your barley is so pretty. And he just looked at me and he was like, what?
So it's like a strange pickup line in a weird sitcom. That's hilarious. So that's great. So that leads me to
French word.
Okay, that's hilarious. I love that. Brian, what's your last question here?
Last question for you is, obviously you know that with what I'm affiliated with and whatnot, Dr. Swan was very big in doing what's called the STR style cask. And I'm wondering if you thought of playing around with that, which is taking a cask that had, say, cognac in it or whatever you used before, scraping, charring it, and refilling it. So it's kind of a different flavor profile completely than using a sherry barrel or a cognac barrel or whatever, but it's still the cognac barrel, but it's different. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you've thought of playing to add a little bit of, because your distinction is that you're playing like we do at Kilhoman, from grain to glass. So with doing grain to glass orientation, this might be something interesting to give you an additional.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, just wholesale, if you are a distiller in the US and you're buying new American oak barrels, they'll start you at about $200 on your COGS, cost of goods. My barrels start at over 1,400 euros per barrel. The French have been very gracious to letting me come into their country and kind of bloom this thing called French whiskey. They might kick me out if I char a Limousin barrel. That just might be the end of Allison in France.
Oh no, we would never want that. So you know, that actually is a very funny way to end this right now. I'm going to ask everybody to unmute. I'm going to ask everybody to, make sure you have something else in your glass. I just poured myself a little bit more Brenne. And I'd like everybody to say cheers and thank you to Allison.
Cheers.
and thank
Thank
you.
you.
Yes.
Well, thank all-
Allison, this was wonderful. We very much appreciate your time. We've been recording this. Eric, usually within 24 to 48 hours, posts this on our Facebook page and also on our YouTube channel, and you'll get information about that. But the bottom line is this: we're trying to enjoy ourselves during the lockdown, and you have helped us do so tonight. We very much appreciate you. We appreciate this. We appreciate you. And with that, we're going to say thank you very much. And good night, everybody. If you all want to stay around for an after party, that's great. And Allison, again, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks,
Thank
Thank you.